Hello everyone. So, I thought that for today I would talk about William Paley's famous Watchmaker Argument and why it is not, in fact, vulnerable to David Hume's objection, contrary to popular belief. Now, I've tried to think of ways to summarize this, but I just figured just the best way to do this I'm just simply going to read pages 102 and 103 from the third edition of Reasonable Faith out loud. And because I think this pretty much perfectly sums everything up here. So I'm just going to read directly from these pages, and then you can all, in the comment section, just tell me what you think. Although most philosophers, who have undoubtedly never read Paley, believe that this sort of critique was dealt a crushing and fatal blow by David Hume's critique of the teleological argument, Paley's argument, which was written nearly 30 years after the publication of Hume's critique, is in fact not vulnerable to most of Hume's objections, as Friedrich Ferri pointed out. Paley opens with a statement of the famous Watchmaker Argument. Quote, "In crossing a heath, suppose I pitched my foot against a stone, and were asked how the stone came to be there. I might possibly answer that for anything I knew to the contrary, it had lain there forever, nor would it perhaps be very easy to show the absurdity of this answer. But suppose I found a watch upon the ground, and it should be inquired how the watch happened to be in that place. I should hardly think of the answer which I had before given, that, for anything I knew, the watch might have always been there. Yet why should not this answer serve for the watch as well as for the stone? Why is it not as admissible in the second case as in the first? For this reason, and for no other, viz., that when we come to inspect the watch, we perceive, what we could not discover in the stone, that its several parts are framed and put together for a purpose, e.g., that they are so formed and adjusted as to produce motion, and that motion so regulated as to point out the hour of the day, that if the different parts had been differently shaped from what they are, of a different size from what they are, or placed after any other manner, or in any other order, then that in which they are placed, either no motion at all would have been carried on in the machine, or none which would have answered the use that is now served by it. To reckon up a few of the plainest of these parts, and of their offices, all tending to one result, we see a cylindrical box containing a coiled elastic spring, which, by its endeavor to relax itself, turns round the box. We next observe a flexible chain, artificially wrought for the sake of flexure, communicating the action of the spring from the box to the fusee, if I'm saying that word right. When we then find a series of wheels, the teeth of which catch in and apply to each other, conducting the motion from the fusee to the balance, and from the balance to the pointer, and at the same time, by the size and shape of those wheels, so regulating the motion as to terminate in causing an index, by an equitable and measured progression, to pass over a given space in a given time. We take notice that the wheels are made of brass in order to keep from the rust, the springs of steel, no other metal being so elastic, that over the face of the watch there is placed a glass, a material employed in no other part of the work, but in the room of which, if there had been any other than a transparent substance, the hour could not be seen without opening the case. The mechanism being observed, it requires indeed an examination of the instrument, and perhaps some previous knowledge of the subject, to perceive and understand it. But being once, as we have said, observed and understood, the inference, we think, is inevitable, that the watch must have had a maker, that there must have existed at some time and at some place or other an artificer or artificers, or whatever that says, who formed it for the purpose which we find it actually to answer, who comprehended its construction and designed its use." End quote. Craig then says here, "This conclusion," Paley continues, "would not be weakened if I had never actually seen a watch being made, nor knew how to make one. For we recognize the remains of ancient art as the products of intelligent design without having ever seen such things made. and we know the products of modern manufacture are the result of intelligence, even though we may have no inkling how they are produced. Nor would our conclusion be invalidated if the watch sometimes went wrong. The purpose of the mechanism would be evident, even if the machine did not function perfectly. Nor would the argument become uncertain if we were to discover some parts of the mechanism that did not seem to have any purpose, for this would not negate the purposeful design of the other parts. Nor would anyone in his right mind think the existence of the watch was accounted for by the consideration that it was one of many possible configurations of matter, and that some possible configuration had to exist in the first place, where the watch was found. Nor would it help to say that there exists in things a principle of order which yielded the watch, for one never knows a watch to be so formed, and the notion of such a principle of order that is not intelligent seems to have little meaning. Nor is it enough to say that the watch was produced from another watch before it, and that one watch from yet a prior watch, and so forth to infinity, for the design is still unaccounted for. Each machine in the infinite series evidences the same design, and it is irrelevant whether one has 10, 1,000, or an infinite number of such machines. A designer is still needed. Now, the point of the analogy of the watch is this. Just as we infer a watchmaker as the designer of the universe, so ought we to infer an intelligent designer of the universe. Quote from William Paley, "For every indication of contrivance, every manifestation of design which existed in the watch exists in the works of nature, of being greater and more, and that in a degree which exceeds all computation. I mean that the contrivances of nature surpass the contrivances of art in the complexity, subtlety, and curiosity of the mechanism. And still more, if possible, do they go beyond them in number and variety, yet in a multitude of cases are not less evidently contrivances, not less evidently accommodated to their end or suited to their office, than are the most perfect products of human ingenuity." End quote. Here, Paley begins his cataloguing of the contrivances of nature, best speaking divine design. He concludes that an intelligent designer of the universe exists, and he closes with a discussion of some of the attributes of this cosmic architect. Now, that being said, regardless as to whether or not you think the watchmaker design is false or not, my point of this video is simply this. It does not fall prey to David Hume's objection, which, for those of you unfamiliar with his objection was basically that he used the example of a house in his book Dialogues Concerning Natural Religion, I think it was called, that I know a house is designed because of prior experience, because I have seen houses being built, therefore I know it's designed, not by observation alone. Well, this is what Paley had this in mind when he wrote the Watchmaker Argument, so this is simply what he is trying to refute. And I apologize if I didn't properly pronounce some of the words. I'm actually better reading in my head than I am out loud, so yeah. I'm curious to know what you all think of this. I look forward to reading your comments.